Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our final breakout session of the conference. I'm Kaya Peterson from NeighborWorks Montana. Happy to be your room host for this session. If you have questions today during the session, please feel free to drop those into the chat. Make sure that you're selecting everyone or all panelists and attendees so we can all see the conversation and the questions that you have for the panelists. This session is sponsored by Opportunity Bank, and we are so appreciative of all of our sponsors for the conference and especially of Opportunity Bank for their support of this session. Our sessions are all being recorded and will be available for 6 months on the Whova app. So you'll have access to the content there, and any documents that our presenters have provided will also be in the Whova app. Okay, I think that's all of our housekeeping today. I'm going to turn the floor over to Jason and Laura. Thanks for joining us and dive right in.
Thank you very much, Kaya. I'm going to go ahead and share screen to get the slideshow started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully, if you can hear okay. My name is Jaynes, and everybody go ahead and mute right now. We're already muted. We're getting a little bit of background. And I've got that one.
Yeah, I'll grab them as they come in. But if you're just joining, please do mute your lines. Thanks.
Just kind of all part of the deal, right? We all kind of get really used to it, and we've noticed even in just the last couple of weeks, it seems like everybody has to kind of forget and remember how to use Zoom. We know that the group that's here has been spending a lot of time on Zoom over the last couple of days. We understand there's been a number of really engaging sessions. So we'll jump right into this one. I'm Jaynes. I'm a landscape architect and site planner with DHM Design, located in Carbondale in Colorado, and that's generally in the Aspen area. And DHM Design is a landscape architecture, land planning, and ecological design and planning firm with offices, our original offices in Denver, and we're located in Carbondale. We also have an office in Durango, Colorado, and then 2 offices in Montana, one in Bozeman and one in Missoula. And our legacy has been in a lot of public work, a lot of public projects, and outreach related projects. So a lot of things that we will talk about today. And we've also built a significant amount of our portfolio in working in the West kind of special places. And so we consider ourselves to be a Western firm, a Western region firm, and the slide that's up on the screen illustrates just a little bit of where and what some of our project history has been. Specific to me, I'm a principal here in the Carbondale office and a managing principal in the firm, and have been in this office, 21 or 22 years, I don't remember anymore. And then just to kind of keep things moving, I'll introduce Laura here, and then we'll hear from her in a little bit. So this is Laura Kirk to my right. And Laura is also a principal and a founding member of the Carbondale office, and a past president and managing partner as well. And Laura and I have both worked since I began, and over a great deal of Laura's career, in public outreach, affordable housing, and public-facing projects together. And so we've kind of been through a lot on our own individual projects and on projects together, and have learned quite a great deal. And so hopefully we can share some of that today. The focus of our conversation today really is about taking some of those experiences, our shared experiences, and interpreting that into some understanding of planning for affordable housing, and how some of these tools and concepts and ideas can be integrated into providing greater access to affordable housing. One of our particular focuses has been on finding that balance between creating community-sourced programs and support, developing livable and sustainable projects, as well as meeting community goals, and oftentimes including significant budget requirements. So to get going here, we'd like to learn a little bit about the group that's in the room. And Kaya, this would be our kind of our first spot for the poll. We should have these set up for that you can answer any one of the, not any one, I'm sorry, any number of the choices that are on the list. So tell us a little bit about who you are, and if you span across a number of these, please answer them all. And that'll give us kind of a sense of who we got here. And we'll just let that run for just a few more seconds. Thank you, everybody, for jumping right in on that. Okay, great. Yep, I think that's good. Perfect. So a lot of folks from Montana, and we kind of expected to see a lot of nonprofit and housing advocates and public agencies in the room. Great. So I'm going to close that up and move on to the next one here. The four specific topics that we would like to address today do have to do with the public outreach process and some of the ins and outs of creating a plan for a public outreach and engagement process, and how that relates to some decision making that could affect all the way through funding. We want to talk briefly about some tools for that engagement and how they've evolved over the last 18 months. Laura's going to talk about site design for livability and balancing that with community goals. And then we'll touch a little bit on creative partnerships and how that affects resourcing and funding. And we want to save some time at the end for Q&A. And what we'd like to do there, and we can talk about it when we get there, is just to use the chat function to submit questions when we get towards the end. So I'll talk for a few minutes about sorry, that was yours,
That's
wasn't
me.
it?
Yep.
I'm going to run right over.
No, we're
Transition to Laura.
transition to me.
Thank
So
you.
again, I'm Laura Kirk, and I have worked with DHM for over 30 years. The last 22 or so, you're in Carbondale, Colorado. And in terms of public outreach, we want to talk about a couple of things. Why do it? What level of engagement do you want with potential stakeholders? How do we start to talk about value alignment? And what are some of the lessons that we've learned? So we're going to do another quick poll here, and we'd like you to answer the question, what do you think of when you hear the word public outreach process? So Kaya, if you could put that up again, we'll do that quickly and get some input from the group. Again, you can do this as a multiple choice response. Okay, it looks like we're getting close to the end here. And that's great. It's great to see that people understand the value of it. We kind of, depending on the audience, sometimes your leading response might be, do I have to? So it's great that people understand the value of the public process and why it's important. We're certainly advocates of an engaged process. Okay, so why do it? We think it's important to do a public process because it identifies community values and needs of both current and potential residents. And that way you get some input from the people that are actually going to be living there, or also you're getting input from adjacent neighbors and other community advocates and interests. It's certainly important from the outset to have a transparent public engagement process. So no matter how robust or kind of moderate that process might be, the more upfront that we are in the beginning, we find that that leads to better end results. The public process offers an opportunity to document priorities and community values, and those can be used to shape the design as it moves forward, so that again it speaks to the stakeholders in the most appropriate way possible. Certainly in a public process, we recognize that the needs of future residents in some aspects will align with and sometimes differ from the public or owner driven priorities. And so finding places where there is that alignment, where there are opportunities for compromise, and recognizing that sometimes not all differences can be resolved, but they can be heard. We do find that the public process provides a foundation for future project success because, again, people feel as though they've been heard. It's often a requirement of receiving funds from either public agencies or federal agencies, and we are finding that there's going to be funding coming down the pipe for this type of housing. And also, certainly, sometimes with affordable housing projects, NIMBYism creeps up, and this is a way to proactively address some of those concerns. So that, we know that sometimes there can be a stigma associated with affordable housing, no matter the project, because people are concerned that it might be too dense. They have concerns about parking, things like that. So again, a public process can be a way to address that from the get-go. When we do a public process, we want to be thoughtful in developing a proactive plan from the beginning so that we step back and think about what we want to accomplish and how we want to engage the public in the outreach process. So some things that we want to consider are how far along is the visioning and how decisive are the decision makers? So where is there opportunity for input and what parts of a project are kind of steadfast and need, there's not room for engagement or influence from the public process. It's also important in developing that proactive strategy to think about who you want to reach and when you want to reach them so that we're getting input from the public at the right time so that we can incorporate that input into the process. Certainly, budget will inform the type of process that is developed because we want to make sure that we have funding for whatever public outreach process it is that is developed for a project. And we want to be clear about the information that we're trying to get from the public and again, the timing of that so that that information is coming at a time where it can be incorporated into the final design and decision-making processes. One of the things here when you look at this pyramid is that there are different ways to engage the public from at the bottom of the pyramid, it's simply kind of as an information session, whereas at the top of the pyramid, it's a much more active collaboration where you're reaching out to the stakeholders to actually shape the design of a project. When we do public outreach, we want to make sure that we're doing it in an authentic way. So however extensive the process, and there's certainly a continuum for that, we want people to feel like their input is valid. And that's a very important thing to establish that level of trust and clarity about the process with the public early on. What we find is, that you have future residents, you have adjacent owners, you have the greater community, and you have the public entity or the private developer that are running the project. And there are going to be places where there's going to be overlap. The more overlap we can get between those values and desires for a project, the more likely there is going to be long-term success. So in those areas of overlap, there is agreement. And then as we try to get greater areas of overlap, we look for places where we can compromise and create alignment around values. Again, recognizing that not everything can be resolved, that we will never get to a place of 100% consensus. But the more that we provide a platform for understanding, the better likelihood we have of success and heading off kind of mobilization against a project. Some of the themes and values that come up when we're talking about affordable housing projects are what type of outdoor amenities are associated with the project, how much parking, how are cars going to be handled, what's the character of the design, what type of density, what's the construction methodology, is it for multifamily housing or single family housing, and what's the layout for transportation, whether that's pedestrian, bicycle, vehicular, or access to public transit. One of the reasons that we find the public process to be valuable is that sometimes our assumptions are challenged. So when we begin a project, we might go into it thinking that people are going to value open space, but perhaps there's been a lot of growth in a particular neighborhood. And what people are more concerned about is parking because they're finding that there are too many cars in the neighborhood. And so a public process can start to identify those types of issues that we as consultants or a public entity coming into a project may not understand. Another kind of thing that we've run across recently is that we thought that future residents would be more interested in compact units with common amenities. But what we found through the public process was for this particular project, what people really wanted were larger units, and that they placed much more value on that than having a project with common amenities. And that was not something that we would have understood or designed into the project without that information from the public process. And so I think what we want to move into now is talking about how we go about getting information in the public process. What are some of those tools that we use? I'm going to hand it over to Jason here for that.
All right. I'll jump right into the next slide here and give a little bit of an overview of the specific tools that we want to talk about. And generally speaking, when we know, and it looks like this group is very, very clearly understands that it's not just about checking a box, it is really about understanding at what level of engagement public and stakeholders should have in terms of influencing and informing the direction for a project. And so once you've stepped into that arena and you want to genuinely engage those groups, it is really important to understand from the very beginning how to develop a plan and to understand what the needs are and to be conscious of the budgets that is required. I think sometimes it can feel a little bit like stepping off a cliff once you make that decision, that you start to believe that you have to talk to everybody, and it becomes very concerning about the milestones at which people are involved and how they can influence decision making, and what are you going to find out at the end of the process that someone has withheld. And so creating a plan and understanding exactly what you're hoping to do with that outreach process becomes extremely important. We also have learned a great deal, and we'll talk a little bit about how some of the tools can be leveraged maybe more effectively than others in certain circumstances. And we would also like to spend a little bit of time looking at what has changed over the last 18 months, given the COVID pandemic. And while we are seeing things open back up and we may expect to see things like outreach processes start to feel a little bit like normal, we believe that they will never be the same again for a variety of reasons that are very valuable and positive. And so talking a little bit about what's going to change moving forward. So we have a poll here, and given that we've got a lot of folks who have done some outreach activities, probably significantly so, we'd like to hear what are the things that you have used in the past for your outreach. Go ahead and pick as many of them as apply. Maybe about 5 more seconds and we'll move on. Oh, great. Thank you, Kaya. So it looks like we have quite a bit of experience across the board here, which is great. Information websites and surveys, maybe a little bit more on the traditional end, along with open houses. And then we'll get in a little bit to the interactive website and talk about how some of those things have changed for us over the last little bit of time. So this image that's on the screen right now is a sample of a communication plan. And sometimes in our projects, it really does feel like we, as whether it's project managers or somebody who's responsible for on the advocacy side or on the agency side, responsible for putting together a project and moving it forward, that we're also assigned the role of PR consultant or communications manager. And that can be intimidating. And there are a lot of places where you can get tripped up if you don't have a plan in place. And the flow chart and the little calendar that's up on the screen is just an example of one way of starting to craft a communication plan. These can stand alone. They can also be part of a larger framework of an overall outreach plan, and we've seen them work both ways. What these do that we find is valuable in sitting down and taking the time to organize them and identify the groups that you're going to target or that you would like to engage is it does make you think about how and when and at what level you want to engage those different groups. And we think it's really important always to think about the different types of groups that you will be reaching out to, whether it's targeted outreach to specific individuals or constituency groups, neighbors, advocacy groups, stakeholders, or members of the general public. Each of those may need to be touched in a different way to really effectively understand their perspective and be responsive. And so creating that plan also helps you understand how things fit into the bigger picture and how that may impact your overall project schedule. These kinds of things, depending on how far in depth they go, can have a significant impact on collecting the data, assimilating that and reporting that information back out and then using it for decision making needs to be built into your schedule. And we find, for example, we're in a ski resort region and community, and there are certain times when public outreach is very effective and other times when it's not. I think anywhere you would go, if you hadn't planned for it and you scheduled an open house on, say, spring break week, you would find that your results would be likely less than desirable. Other things that really helps to do is to create a roadmap for how you will document the process. And so some of this information that we're sharing here on the screen is in an outreach report, and it substantiates the effort that you have made, which can go to some of the funding things that we'll talk about in a little bit. It can also, for decision makers, give them ground to stand on if and when they get pushback on decisions that have been made. And it also helps to illustrate to the members of the public or others that you've reached out to what they should expect as participants in the process overall. I think as much as anything, it creates a forum and a format to test alignment of expectations between decision makers and project team. So a specific tool that we would like to get into that became very, very important over the last 18 months, and we saw exponential growth in our use of these, is project websites. And we found it to be extremely effective. In April of last year, we had a number of clients come to us and say, should we just stop this? Are we actually going to be able to get the impact and the information that we need to be able to substantiate decisions that we have made? And we said, we think you can't wait. We got to go ahead with this. And we went to several all digital outreach campaigns, and it significantly changed the way we adjusted things like project websites. And we did find them to be effective, and we'll talk about what we found to be effective. And what we're also finding now, and I think we saw it in the poll here as well, is that they're now basically expected parts of an outreach campaign. And they are entirely scalable. They can span from very, very simple to just being an information, a landing page where you can find out where the next activity is. You don't necessarily interact, but you know where you can go to see what the schedule looks like. Really, really basic. Domains are cheap to buy, and those are very inexpensive to set up and maintain. The next level, and it kind of scales up from there, are simple places to allow people to provide feedback. It's just having essentially a comment card. You can go at any time and you can say whatever you want about whatever you feel about the project that is, I guess, under consideration. Also, again, very easy to set up. You can get a lot of good information from those. And for projects that have a constrained budget, oftentimes that's what we've done, an information website and a comment card. As you get up through the levels of complexity, the image that's on the screen right now is a project that we've been working on in Aspen, an outreach campaign that lasted over 3 cycles of outreach, just over a year of time. And this became the home for that project because all of that kicked off during lockdown when everything was closed down. And it's significantly complicated because we needed to use it to provide information about the project. We needed to use it to get information back. And we also needed it to be a resource for folks who wanted to do research on what we were working on. And so that was envisioned as a comprehensive tool that was providing rich content, document storage, interactive features that kept people engaged long enough to actually give us some information and learn about the project. To pull something like that off without bringing in a separate web designer, it is crucially important to map out what you want that experience to be. And so this diagram, while I don't think we need to go into any detail about how it's organized, it really is about where you land, where you go to get information, and what is it that we're hoping to get from that experience. What information are we either trying to give out or receive, and how does that inform how we organize the website? It's really important to do something like this early on, particularly if you're developing a custom website, but also if you're using some of those off-the-shelf tools that are commonly available to build project websites. You get something like 2 or 3 seconds to get somebody's attention, and then they will bump to their next activity if you haven't caught their eye. And so we'll talk a little bit about how we use this diagram to make sure we were getting people's attention and getting the information that we needed. So setting up a map like this ensures that you are accomplishing what you're setting out to do. It also will give you a lot of really good information about what kind of format makes the most sense. Are you building your website into a pre-existing agency site? Are you going to create something that has its own standalone identity? Something else that happens once you dive into websites and you make a commitment to driving traffic to that website, to use that as kind of your identity and your home for a project, is you get access to incredible volumes of data and information. And the bottom line is this is being collected whether you take advantage of it or not, and it's free to set up the data tracking that's associated with, for example, this is Google Analytics. And so you can get a lot of really good understanding about how people are engaging. Is your website being effective at getting attention and conveying information? Are people staying long enough to actually do something on the website? Something else that we can see very clearly is when we have had advertising pushes, in this case, it was largely social media, that's where we see the spikes on that top graph, that's users per day. So we felt like we were effective in those, the communication side of things, because every time we put something out, we would get a spike in users. The other thing that it provides on the back end is a lot of really good engagement information to put into summaries. We have, X number of people visited the site over a certain period of time. We've engaged this many people, and they spent this much time learning about the project. And what we found for this one in particular is we had exponentially more participants, kind of people touched and informed about the project when we really drove traffic to that website. So again, really easy to get your hands on this information. It's qualitative in nature, but it substantiates a lot of the effort oftentimes in terms of decision making. A specific tool, jumping next, that we often now see embedded in the website. So to us, it kind of flows from that. We saw this in the survey that the poll that you all just took, that is more traditional, but very, very common, is a community survey. And you see these a lot. We have found, particularly during the last 18 months, that we had to be very careful about how often we use these, because you get some survey fatigue. There's so many opportunities for people to engage online right now. You have to be very careful about how you go about doing it and using it at a time when it's most valuable to your project. And something that we did, and this was for that same project in Aspen, we wanted to make sure we gave people an opportunity to provide feedback, but we also didn't want them to have to spend a bunch of time watching videos or reading before they jumped into the survey. That's really what they want, right? They're coming to your website to tell you what they think. And we saw the survey as an opportunity to get that information back from them by asking very pointed and specific questions, but at the same time, using some tools that allowed those questions to be expanded so that there was some content related to the question. So you could learn some context, you could learn some information about the project or some context, and then answer the question. And so you got to do it all at once. And if you knew what you wanted to say, you already had your opinion formed, you could just kind of track your way through and answer those questions. It also gave us an opportunity to engage very specific subgroups by asking contextual questions that then either opened or I guess allowed access to some additional questions. If you said you were interested in living on this project, you got a different series of questions than somebody who just wanted to provide their opinion. And so we could create some granular information too. These are qualitative survey results. They give us numbers, but they're not statistically valid. And our goal when we put something like this out is to make sure we get enough engagement that you get an idea about the community's feedback and position on it. And there are cases where it's either necessary, either from a funding or a community standpoint, to have a statistically valid survey. Oftentimes, I think we all know those are quite expensive to do, and we can get something like this up relatively inexpensively and get a lot of really good feedback in using this format. Something else to keep in mind for these websites and surveys is some of them do require registration. And in having conversations with folks during our outreach, we strip out all of the registration requirement information because people have flat out said, if you make me give my name and create a password, I'm not going to participate. And the time that it takes to create that information is greater than that attention span of arriving at a website and then leaving. So it's something to keep in mind. Sometimes it's necessary. We recommend that be avoided if it's possible. And then, of course, the targeted outreach as an activity. These tend to be one-on-one conversations or open houses are still really important. There still is that human touch component of engaging with the public or engaging with stakeholders, meeting people where they are one-on-one, seeing you face-to-face. Although we think some of these digital engagement processes and tools are critically important and are never going to go away and may become primary outreach tools, that we know that getting out into the community and talking to people, there is no substitute for that. And we just recognize that sometimes it's a challenge to get people to give their time. We do anticipate that as we come out of the pandemic, that people are going to be eager for some of this kind of in-person outreach. And you just have to be creative about it. What you see on the screen right now is an outreach event where there was another community event ongoing, and we piggybacked onto it. And they had complementing kind of overarching philosophies. And so people didn't have to make a special trip to come out just to talk to us about a trailhead in this particular project, but they were already out at an event and they came in and talked to us while they were there. So we found being strategic about when those happen and how you engage people becomes incredibly important. So as you've gone through that process and you've gained all of this information and you've made a plan about how you want to use it and when you want to use it and how it's going to inform your decision making, now how do you use that information to begin to develop site plans and actually drive your program? And that's what Laura's going to take over here and talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So when we think about site design, a couple of things that we want to talk about are creating the project story or the narrative, looking at the carrying capacity of the site, and thinking about quality of life for the end users. When we work on an affordable housing project, one of the things that we found is very valuable is to create a story, to be able to express the narrative and the vision to both current and future potential residents of a project, and to other stakeholders, so that people understand what the goals of the project are, what the vision is. They want to understand, who's being kind of, who is it that's going to live at this project in the future? Is it a family project? Is it a rental property? Is it conceived as ownership, multifamily? Is it apartment living, townhouses? Is it rural? Is it urban? And the more of that that can be woven into the narrative, the better that everybody begins to understand kind of what the future might look for like. The image that you see on the screen right now was a competition for a family affordable housing project in kind of semi-rural environment. And what we were trying to do here is just to convey the character and the vibrancy of the neighborhood. We saw it as kind of very active with some kind of private space, but a lot of public community space. And we were trying to just kind of capture some of the things and themes that would be carried throughout the project, both in terms of character of the housing and character of the neighborhood. How you begin to overlay opportunities and constraints in a project ultimately results in coming together to create the final master plan direction. So what we want to think about in terms of site design is the context. What is the neighborhood character, and how is our project going to fit within that neighborhood? The project needs to respond to services that are available there, and the accessibility and availability of transit. Is the project going to include commercial and retail space? And what's the proximity to open space? Certainly, and that can vary. Sometimes the open space is built into the project itself. Sometimes it might be adjacent or within easy walking distance. I think one of the things we have learned through the pandemic is that people are placing greater value on readily accessible open space. And that can be, simply a patio or a place to grill or a place to sit in the sunshine and feel safe and just have that bit of, outside time. Carrying capacity, it's important to look at the desired level of density so that a project is not overly dense for the site itself, but also you're taking advantage of that because it's hard to build affordable housing. So it's finding that balance between what sort of an acceptable level of density and how much benefit can we gain from an available piece of property. Certainly, the site will also help to determine the demographics of a project. Is it better suited for singles versus families, rental versus ownership? And what types of income levels are we looking for on a particular site? Always parking comes up. And I think for any of you on the call that have worked on affordable housing projects, this is something that we spend a lot of time talking about. Is we'd like to be in a carless world, perhaps, but people have cars, and we need to find places for them so that they don't become problems down the road. As we think about site design and incorporating information that we've gathered through the public process, we want to reach a balance between livability and affordability. So we're creating projects where people can live and where they have a sense of pride of ownership or rental if they're renting. But the more pride that people have in the place where they live, the more likely they are to take care of that unit and take care of that space. Again, the importance of the open space, whether that's a balcony or a patio, a shared grill area, or something more, a park or playground, etc. It's very important to understand how people live. They need closets, they need storage. And if we don't think about those things, then we get spillover effects, and that becomes a problem because then it's messy and it's an area of conflict down the road. In designing affordable housing projects, we also want to think about the value of amenities, that We want to include amenities in the projects, but we have to think about the cost of ownership. And also very important is the operational and maintenance costs over time so that we can take care of things that are provided for in a project. And lastly, those quality of life things will be balanced against the project financing and the budget available. But in all of those, we want to make sure that at the end we have a project where people want to live and can live comfortably. Jason's going to finish up here talking about how we create partnerships to finance these types of projects.
Thanks, Laura. And I'm going to try to get through this last batch of slides before we pop the poll up here in just a few minutes so that we've got some time. We see that there's a number of items in the chat, and we want to make sure to get to those. So first, we would love to see from the group here about how you go about historically or even at present finding funding for your projects. Choose as many as apply. Yep, great. I think we'll end it there. And not surprising at all, right? It's hard to come by, particularly in places where there aren't mechanisms in place to provide funding to organizations. That partnerships are just absolutely required, and quite a few responses on everybody thinks it's the other person at the table who has the money. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the creative partnerships that we have seen. First and foremost, we have to emphasize here that we're landscape architects, site planners. We are not financial experts or financing experts. And actually that brings us to the first point, which is for us, we believe this is a place for dedicated expertise. And we've worked on a number of recent projects with experts who have shown us very clearly that that is critically important when you're looking both for partnerships and for outside funding. Right now, there are a number of significant opportunities, and given those opportunities and how complex it can be to obtain and then administer that money, that's kind of our top takeaway, is finding the right people to be on the team who can help you navigate that is critically important. Tracking, implementing, and understanding how the potential financing options can influence decision-making has been really important for us recently. On a recent project, for example, in our valley, and it involved the relocation of some existing residents, there was some methodology implications for how that went, how the project team and the county went about performing that relocation that had implications on what funding would be available. And without those partners at the table as a part of the team from the early planning stages, that would not have been clear. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the organizational partnerships that we're seeing in a moment on P3s and other programs. So the organizations, I think what we'd like to hit on here most quickly is that what we're seeing are groups are now moving out of their silos to participate in provision of affordable housing. So whether it's stepping outside of their traditional mission or stepping outside of their geographic location, organizations are looking for those creative partnerships. And what we found when we've asked them questions directly on some projects, why they haven't participated in partnerships to date, they simply said, we just haven't been in the room with the other groups. And so creating opportunities for that cross collaboration and bringing people together, oftentimes you'll find if you ask the question, who's interested in being involved, nearly everyone will raise their hand. And then you have an opportunity to figure out who is most suited to participate in an individual project. Let's see. I'm going to just jump right ahead to some of the P3 conversation here. What we find is really valuable here is, number one, this is seen oftentimes as a magic bullet. And, hey, we don't know how we're going to finance this. Let's run a P3. And it really does take a specific amount of dedication from the agency or the organization who would be sponsoring that public-private partnership. But it requires the right conditions for it to be right. And so oftentimes, whether it's an agency or an oversight body being able to use limitation of liability or bonding mechanisms or providing land, providing streamlined land use arrangements. The costs will still be borne one way or another. They don't disappear when you have a P3 arrangement, but in some cases, it's the way they are borne that makes a P3 enticing. In other cases, it's even just about creating capacity. If you don't have dedicated staff who can help you advance a project, oftentimes a P3 might be a good choice. If you don't have dedicated staff to own and operate and manage a rental facility, we've seen that be successful there as well. So you can use that public sector to come in with some incentives or advantages that an agency can provide to increase the capacity of your organization to deliver housing. And I think that's really it. The flexibility that provides as another arrow in the quiver, not a magic bullet, but we've seen it work well. The other one is the federal and state programs. I think we've seen a historic amount of money available from a broad array of organizations. The image that's up on the screen right now is actually a snippet from a report that was provided by one of those experts who understands where to go look, how to evaluate, and how to provide recommendations back to you on where you should spend your time pursuing. And that report is significant and deep and long, and there's a lot of money that we understand to be in the pipeline as well. And so, of course, it's not free, right? Tracking it takes a huge amount of time. And then administering it on the back end takes a huge amount of time. As you go up the ladder into the federal echelon of financing and funding, the paperwork and the reporting on the back end, we've even had clients say, it just takes so much paperwork, it's actually not even worth me pursuing. And so again, having somebody who can tell you where it's valuable to spend your time, because that money is out there, but you can chase your tail all day long because there are so many places to go look. Related to having that expertise in evaluating the available money, we have also had from the very beginning on projects, grant writers who can tell you how to go about formatting your approach to applying for grants. And again, having these individuals and these experts at the table from the very beginning will help you understand where your decision making. Let's talk about, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about the outreach process. What kind of outreach information do you need to give you access to some of the funding that you might be interested in? So again, being able to have those experts in the room. We have a number of examples of how some local communities have used grant writers and funding experts as a part of the project team from conceptual planning and outreach all the way through, has opened a number of doors that would not have otherwise not been opened. So we kind of want to get to the closing so we can get into the chat and get to some questions and answers. And we know that there have been other sessions in this conference that are related to funding and access, and we know that's front of everyone's mind. And so what we're hoping to do is just illustrate some ways that ties into the outreach, ties into formation of team and comprehensive planning of a project, and how having that on the front end can begin to inform how you make decisions moving through your project. Laura, do you have anything in closing before?
No, I think we'll just
shut that down.
Open it up to questions and answers. And Kaya, I don't know if you can help us with this.
Yes, I can. So let's see what we have in the chat so far. And if you have a question, please feel free to just pop that in the chat. So first of all, just a logistics question. Are you guys going to be able and willing to share those slides with the attendees?
Yes, we are willing to do that. And hopefully, Kai, you can help facilitate that. So
yeah, I can. You can just send those to me. I'll help you with that.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Great, thank you. I think people are really appreciating the visuals and the approach and what you presented. So we did have a question in Hoover earlier, and you touched on this a little bit, but interested in if you have anything more you wanted to share about striking that balance between livability and affordability, and what some of those trade-offs are that you see in these kinds of projects.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, that is sort of the big question as you move forward in these, right? Is that it's important that it's affordable because we need to get people into units, and Construction costs right now are out of sight. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. The cost of lumber has tripled recently, and that's going to be a real challenge for us as we try to design affordable projects, because even, just the square footage costs are escalating well beyond what people's income levels are. But we don't want to create shoeboxes for people either, right? Because people need to live, and they need to live in places that promote their health and their well-being. And having shelter and a roof is certainly of foremost importance. But again, we need those things, like we need people to have viable bedroom spaces and closets and kitchens that work and storage, and they need to feel safe. And so it's a constant kind of I don't know if struggle is the right word, but kind of again, that sort of weighing of the trade-offs that we're making, and not losing sight of the end goal to build affordable housing, but not to do it at the expense of when people live there, they're not happy.
So much of it has to do with keeping that in mind from the very beginning and incorporating things that we may consider to be just basic design thinking, but they end up kind of being amenities. And you potentially need to spend less on amenities if you design it correctly. For example, if you have even small outdoor spaces, Laura talked about small outdoor spaces with access to daylight and sunlight, so that a relatively small unit becomes bigger because you can spill out and kind of increase your square footage. So I guess for me, if you're thinking about it from a design perspective early on, it's not about adding on a bunch of nifty things to make an uncomfortable place feel better, but it's what are the things that people are really looking for. And it really is about asking those folks who will likely live there, what's your target audience, what's important to them. We had a conversation recently for a school district, and it was, would you rather have a secure locker for your bike or a fire pit that you and your friends can gather around? And nobody wanted a fire pit. They want a place to keep their stuff. They want to be able to kind of get outside, and they want to be able to have some comfort. So in a lot of those cases, it also takes thinking about amenities a little bit differently.
Great, and a couple of questions here that are somewhat related. Asking about messaging, people have all of these things that they want, and it's not always realistic. So how do you message around that, and lessons on getting to common ground, lessons on messaging and approaches to getting to common ground?
You want me to go? Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And sometimes we even start outreach process on a blank sheet and a blank sheet of paper or a blank site. And that's really asking for that, right? It's really asking for everybody to ask for everything. If you ask somebody, would they rather have a 1-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom apartment, it's pretty easy to know where that's going to go. And so sometimes that's not valuable to ask. And part of planning for that outreach and communication process is letting people know how you're going to use the information that you're getting back from them. And, sometimes very early on, you're looking for that broad picture. And then as you refine it and go back out and talk to people about, you begin to inject some of that practicality or the reality, or you ask them to make value decisions. Would you rather have a second parking space or X, Y, Z? What's your preference? What would give you a higher quality of life? Because then you can have those honest conversations. We know we can't give everybody everything. We know there are fundamentally going to be trade-offs. What's most important to you? And if you've even targeted more specifically the kinds of people who would be living there, depending on your group, sometimes that's easy and sometimes it's hard, you can get some really good information about what people are looking for. I mean, we've had people say to the parking thing, if you don't give me 2 parking spaces, I just wouldn't even consider living there. That's not a viable solution for me. And then I think the last thing is to be open and upfront about how you're going to use the information. Laura showed that Venn diagram, and we always look for those overlaps, but sometimes you just have to tell people, and not everybody's going to get what they want. We're going to try to do what's best for the most people. And even that helps folks to understand, hey, I've been listened to, I've been heard, and I might not see my preferences in the results, but I'm also not going to come back and scream and shout that I wasn't listened to. And so in some cases, it is just about couching it in realistic expectations. And we try to do that as often as possible.
Great. Bill asked a question about whether you've had any experience in incremental housing design and in this current disrupted supply chain and the challenges we're all facing in getting projects built and in adjusting zoning and creating underlying environments in which development can be done. Have you worked on incremental design, and what's your take on that?
I'm not, if Bill's here, could he define what he's meaning exactly by incremental design?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's something that I've seen in other countries on different projects, but basically it's a self-help model where the homeowners would also be building the home, or a multifamily home as funding and construction materials become more available. So it's not necessarily building the home all at once, but then getting to that and then finding creative design solutions to make it comfortable for them.
I don't know that we have experience with incremental housing exactly as you talk about it, but certainly we've seen quite a few of Habitat for Humanity types of projects where people are relying on volunteers to help get those projects completed and relying on the input and the help of the future homeowners for those projects. And there have been some very successful applications of that locally here. We have a project that's been very well received. It's a net zero project, and the housing has come in, at affordable square footages, and it's very well done. Again, it's very energy conscious. It's got nice daylight, and people are thrilled to be living there. So and they have done that in a bit of a stop and start. That forced to do that not because of the supply chain, but because of the pandemic. But they have people and volunteers working on those projects again. So I'm not sure if that answers your question directly. I do think, the supply chain is a problem for anyone in the construction industry right now. And that's a challenge that we're all going to face. And I do think that public entities are going to have to figure out how to help developers through that process, because things may take longer as you wait out certain situations. And we have seen some projects that are just going to wait to start construction until a year from now, hoping that the supply chain is better by then and that maybe costs will have stabilized. So they're going to take a whole year off here, and that may result in kind of negotiations with public entities for extended periods of vesting or things like that.
Great. And it looks like there's some additional chat about incremental design and development. So if any of you who have that interest want to start a community conversation in Hoover, that might be a good place to share some ideas and experience.
We'd love to learn more about that for sure.
Great. Michael asked about if you can talk about underground versus surface parking and basic ballpark figures or basic where to start even thinking about it in terms of the variables.
Yeah, that's a really good one. And that lumberyard project that we put up on for the website is wrestling with that, and to a point where it's even difficult to get to a final preferred conceptual master plan because of the push-pull of the cost of storing cars underground, versus the desired number of units, unit yield on a site and unit density on a site. And then that's going kind of head to head with a council desire to reduce reliance on personal automobiles and public recognition that if you don't provide the parking on this site, they're going to go park somewhere else and become someone else's burden. And so what we have been trying to do to navigate that is look at it a number of different ways. That there are some decisions that have to be made on the part of, in this case, it's a city council, of what, so they've established a unit density that they would like to achieve. And so where are your points of compromise? Are you willing to compromise on having larger masses of buildings above ground, in which case then you can consume more land area for surface parking? Or are you more willing to compromise on cost to deliver maybe a more community compatible project by parking the cars underground? And then the other choice is obviously to reduce the unit count and reduce the total cost of parking that. So I mean, all of this I think is not groundbreaking. It's all kind of well known. But what we've been trying to do to help them even navigate it, where in many of the places where a lot of folks here live, we're seeing that skyrocketing land costs as well. And the opportunity cost of going out and acquiring another parcel to achieve the additional units that you would lose by not parking cars underground and not compromising on those other things. Oftentimes what we're finding likely offsets the premium cost of providing the underground parking. Where we are, this project is in Aspen, Colorado, and so some of the highest construction costs in the country, and we're talking about on a greenfield site with easy access, not in an urban area where it's constrained, $50,000 to $60,000 per parking space, and a $20,000 to $30,000 cost premium over underbuilding on surface parking or on surface parking. And so it's a tough pill to swallow. And what they're having to grapple with is, does that mean we're going to phase the project out longer? But I don't see how they find community uptake on a project that would compromise the unit count, the buildings becoming too large, and so no longer having community or neighborhood contextual compatibility, or reducing the parking count and under parking the project. And so it's almost like they're being kind of forced into that to meet those other goals. And so if you can get a community to come out or decision-making body to come out and say, these are our priorities, then I think you can justify that, I think, a little bit more clearly. I don't know if I've answered that question or not, but that we have absolutely been grappling with that on a number of projects.
Yeah, we know we're seeing it here too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are out of time. We got so into the discussion and really appreciate Jason and Laura, both of you sharing your fantastic expertise and perspective with us today. I'll connect with you separately. We'll grab those slides and everyone will have access to those. Thanks for your great questions, everyone. We have a half-hour break and then we'll be closing today with our final plenary session at 2:30. I do hope you'll join us. We have 3 fantastic resident clients joining us to share their experience accessing COVID relief funding to stabilize their housing. We'll also be hearing from Cheryl Cohen with Montana Housing about how some of those relief efforts and funding efforts are going. So hope to see you at 2:30. Thanks again, Jason and Laura. See you soon.
Thank you so
very
much, everyone.
Thank you for
Appreciate it.
attending.